One of the toughest things I realized when I cut out alcohol from my life was that the social version of myself that involved me drinking and partying on the weekends, that version that was being accepted by everyone else was not the same version of me that is my authentic self. And that means that there's this discrepancy between who I really am and who the people around me think I am. And that's a hard thing to reconcile, especially early on when you first cut out alcohol and you realize that you're not the same person in social situations without the booze. If you're new here, my name is Jamie. I'm 27 and I've been alcohol-free for over a year. I do not come from a background of alcohol abuse or substance abuse, so that's not what I talk about on this channel. Rather, I was somebody who drank socially, drank on the weekends, and knew that was holding me back from achieving my goals. I'm no sobriety expert or anything like that. I just share what worked for me on my alcohol-free journey in the hopes that it might help somebody else out there. As I was saying, there's this difference between the way that we are truly and authentically and the way that we show up in social situations with alcohol. That's at least how I felt. And I think the thing that makes it difficult to navigate when you cut out alcohol is that you start to lose touch a little bit with who you are inside and who you are authentically. If you're somebody who used alcohol as a social lubricant and as a social crutch for a long time, you start to forget what that authentic version of you is, and you just realize what the, drunk social version of you is. So when you cut it out of your life, then now you're kind of forced to reconcile with that difference. And I think that can be very challenging for a lot of people. And it is a very tough realization to realize that maybe people are missing the drunk version of you and the version of you that they're used to partying, and they don't necessarily, immediately at least, feel inclined to hang out with the sober version of you that might be a little more awkward, a little less fun. Maybe you're not doing all the stuff that you usually would do when you were drinking in social situations. And I think that realization can be a tough pill for people to swallow. At least it was for me. I knew that my friends still really valued me as a person, but because I wasn't, playing the drinking games and standing on tables and dancing all crazy and like late into the night, I wasn't quite as fun to be around per se in those traditional fun party terms. And so I was definitely not the same version that I had been to them and to my social circle. And so people had to reconcile with that on their side, but I had to reconcile with that on my side, that, this version of me that was accepted by them over the course of a few years was not necessarily the same version of me that I am now becoming in the alcohol-free part of my life. There's no shame or shade on those people for feeling like that, because of course that's just who you were to them, right? But I think on the side of the person who's cutting out alcohol, you have to give them a little bit of grace too. And obviously, there's a difference between somebody who's pressuring you and who's being a total dick to, drink, or who's being mean or rude. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about people navigating new versions of you and new ways that you behave. It's just like you're figuring it out for the first time if you're new to the alcohol-free journey. So are the people in your social circle. And sometimes people will fade from that because they realize that the version of you that you are now isn't the same as the fun version that they liked. But a lot of those people will stay, and it just becomes a new version, a 2.0 version of the relationship that you had with them. And then the other facet of this, I think, is that it's important to acknowledge and reflect that there is a certain element of grief that comes with this process. Andrew Garfield, who obviously is a famous actor, went on, I think it was Stephen Colbert or some show, and he was talking about, the loss of his mother. So this is not at all to do with alcohol-free living or anything like that, but he talked about the idea of grief and said that grief is all the unexpressed love that we have for someone. And so in this case, again, he was talking about his mother. But I think there is a certain connection that can be made too with this process of becoming a new version of yourself, and then feeling that like sadness about leaving the old version behind. And I think this idea applies to being alcohol-free as well. To speak from personal experience, because I don't want to put any words on anyone else, I think part of me looked down upon the version of myself that drank and relied on alcohol and to be in social situations sometimes. I didn't like that part of myself when I was doing it, and when after I became alcohol-free, I looked back at that part of me with judgment and that version of me with judgment. But I think as time goes on, you start to have less judgment a negativity towards that version of you, knowing that it was just a step on the journey. I think when you start to look at the old version of you in a positive way instead of a negative way, that's when that kind of feeling of sadness or grief comes out. Then there's a certain level of love and appreciation for that old version of ourselves that we never used to have. And I think that's what personally is the stem and the root of the grief and sadness that you start to feel. So I make this video now to anyone watching this just to say that if you are, on your alcohol-free journey, and whether that's newly on it or you've been alcohol-free for a while, and you have any of those feelings of grief or sadness of kind of this old version of yourself, this part of yourself that you had to shed, and that version was the version that was accepted and liked by the people in your circle, it's okay to feel those things. Like, that's part of the process. I think there's a lot of people out there who go through that same emotional roller coaster, and it's a bit of a weird thing because you usually see a lot of benefit and value from making the choice of going alcohol free, but it then comes with these weird negative kind of emotions and side effects. And negative as in, like, it's not something people like to feel, grief and sadness, but I think it's just par for the course in terms of processing that old version of yourself and letting the compassion come out instead of just any animosity or negativity. But yes, you're not alone feeling that. Make sure to process and feel the feels and know that people do love you for you now, that you are your authentic self. So keep living authentically and know that alcohol and everything in your life that was altering that way you showed up to the world isn't necessary. If you thought this video was helpful or motivational or inspirational, anything like that, or you just want to keep seeing my videos pop up on your feed, please subscribe to my channel for more alcohol-free and self-improvement content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.